this point, it was too late to save TSR. But if anyone could save D&D, it was the kids who'd grown up loving the game. Kids who went to Gen Con every year. Kids who knew all the names we've covered and more. Kids who'd grown up and gotten business degrees. Perhaps not the hero we want, but for the mess that TSR is in, we need someone with deep pockets and a lot of backing. Someone who knows how to run a company. A person like Peter Adkison. As a child, Peter fell in love with Dungeons & Dragons. Based on a guild he was in, he and his friends settled on creating a game company called Wizards of the Coast. He published a game called Castles and Conquest under the name Wizards of the Coast, but he needed to make money, and so Adkison went to college and got a job as a system analyst for Boeing. Even while working this day job, Adkison was still a gaming enthusiast at heart. He started to design a game with a friend called the Primal Order. He resurrected the Wizards of the Coast brand and published the game under that. He put together a staff and hired writers and editors to revise the game over and over. When it was finally released, it did so to positive reviews. However, they'd made the mistake of mentioning how the book could be used with Palladium games, and Palladium sued the pants off of them, nearly driving the young Wizards of the Coast out of business.
It's like, when people are trying to avoid showing the labels on things, right? You just slap a little piece of duct tape over the brand name. Have to be more vague about it.
Yeah, you gotta be a little more careful than that. You can't just back then, games, all of them, TSR especially, they were very litigious, very protective of their territory, of their niche, which is part of what TSR and WotC are going to address going forward. He wanted to grow Wizards of the Coast into a business that could stand on its own. He needed a hit product. He met up with another friend named Richard Garfield. Richard Garfield was a gamer as well. He'd grown up playing Dungeons & Dragons. When he was approached by Adkison, he was serving as visiting professor of mathematics at the Whitman College. But Garfield had a second passion, game design. Garfield had a game idea called Robo Rally. Unfortunately, Robo Rally was too damn expensive with a bunch of fiddly components and cards. But the cards intrigued both Garfield and Adkison. They decided to explore the space of a game which used cards printed with high-quality fantasy art. Garfield had long been a fan of the game Cosmic Encounters and had developed his own game called Five Magics as a derivative of that game. He took ideas from Five Magics and used the baseball trading card market as a baseline of comparison. From that, he developed an entirely new kind of game, Magic the Gathering.
I know that game.
Yeah!
I play that game.
Yeah! It's hard to understand now how revolutionary Magic the Gathering was. It created the collectible card game in the very same way that D&D created the role-playing game. That is to say that it synthesized 1,000,000 ideas already in the air and built on 1,000 minor legacies to create something transformative and exciting. Just as D&D emerges from the Braunsteins and Kriegspiels, so too does Magic emerge from the boiling broth of game design perfectly suited to take the world by storm. Wizards of the Coast exploded into the game world almost precisely alongside the catastrophic collapse of TSR. They got the license to make the Pokemon TCG and went from printing money to swimming in a pool of liquidity. Their game couldn't do anything but sell. The world was hungry for the thrill of cracking packs and taking new combinations of cards to school. Every schoolyard in the country was awash with children playing against each other. It even developed its own satanic panic. It truly couldn't have been a better mirror for the early days of TSR, except that it was run by people with business degrees who knew how to make money off of it. Adkison, flush with cash, had heard about the difficulties of TSR. He'd loved D&D since he was a child, and his company needed to grow its line of products. It was a match made in heaven, at least in his mind. However, when he went to Lorraine Williams, she flatly refused his offer before he could even remember sitting down. You see, for years, WotC had been commenting on the decline of TSR. This spooked creditors and lenders alike, making Lorraine's life even harder. She hated WotC. She absolutely should have taken this deal, but she would not. However, there was another offer on the table. Bob Abramowitz got his business degree in 1979. He had briefly worked at TSR in the 1980s. After that, he worked in a number of positions and made a lot of money. Five Rings Publishing was struggling to finance the latest expansion to their game, Legend of the Five Rings. They brought in Abramowitz to secure financing. Bob became CEO and grew the company from a few thousand in sales to millions. In 1987, Five Rings was looking for a bit more money to get its next products out the door. That's when it learned two interesting facts. TSR was in trouble, and WotC wanted TSR. Abramowitz was a wizard at raising money, and he knew Lorraine from back when he'd worked at TSR. He was perhaps the only person who could make a deal happen. Abramowitz went to Lorraine and offered to buy the company. She was hesitant, but tentatively agreed to let Five Rings buy out TSR. She was surely desperate by this time. After all, ignoring everything else about her poor management, she had done everything in her power to this point to try and protect what few staff she could, and the company itself. Now, the only way to save it was to sell it. Abramowitz didn't have the money to buy TSR. He didn't even have the money to print his next book. Bob Abramowitz told Ryan Dancy that his plan was simple. Drive to the cliff as fast as possible, and hope that Ryan Dancy could build wings for L5R before it crashed. His whole strategy was to get L5R big enough and attractive enough that WotC had to buy it, and D&D was the final piece of the puzzle. A crown jewel that they could never have imagined getting even 1 year ago, now ripe for the plugging. He went to WotC and told them that he had a tentative deal with TSR, and he'd bring WotC in on the deal if they promised to acquire Five Rings as well. Adkison agreed almost immediately. Lorraine was not happy to learn about the deception, but with little alternative and facing insolvency, she finally acquiesced. Just like that, D&D was saved from the scrap heap. So
what
Bob,
a middleman move.
Yeah, right? Bob didn't have the money to buy TSR, but he knew WotC wanted it. So he got an offer to buy from TSR and then gave that offer to WotC.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Should not have worked, but that's just the kind of stuff that happens in big business.
I think I'm glad it did.
Yeah.
We're playing it today.
Yeah. Ryan Dancy had worked for Five Rings Publishing. He'd helped negotiate the deal with Abramowitz. However, Abramowitz was about to take a golden parachute out into the wider world of finance and business. Dancy was going to stick around at TSR, working as the right-hand man for Adkison. It was him who was sent to tour the premises of the TSR building after they'd acquired it. He later wrote in a forum post, "I met staff members who were determined to continue to work, despite the knowledge that they might not get paid and might not even be able to get into the building the next day. I saw people who were working on the same manuscripts they'd been working on for 6 months, never knowing if they'd actually be able to produce the fruits of their labor. In the eyes of those people, many of whom I have come to know as friends and coworkers, I saw defeat, desperation, and the certain knowledge that somehow, in some way, they had failed. The force of the human, personal pain in that building was nearly overwhelming. On several occasions, I had to retreat to a bathroom to sit and compose myself so that my own tears would not further trouble these already tortured souls. I know now what killed TSR. It wasn't trading card games. It wasn't Dragon Dice. It wasn't the success of other companies. It was a near total inability to listen to their customers, hear what they were saying, and make changes to make those customers happy. TSR died because it was deaf." Kim Mohan later said in an interview with Dragon Talk, a Wizards owned podcast, that the transition to WotC was very well handled and that he didn't have a single bad thing to say about it. 80% of the employees made the transition to Seattle, and many who didn't because they didn't want to leave Wisconsin. The entire team was transplanted and continued to work with each other, which gave them a sense of continuity. They were able to hit the ground running and keep working mostly as they had before. Now, this is just my opinion, but I can't imagine the relief of finally working for a real company after all those years. A place with regular hours, with deadlines, with managers who knew anything about what's happening, who have formal avenues for feedback, an actual HR department. Peter Adkison called an all-hands meeting, the first they'd ever had at TSR. He asked the people what they needed to do their jobs, who they needed. He got rid of Brian Thompson and brought back Mary Kirchhoff. He killed the Drizzt novel in the works and worked to mend fences with a host of authors, including Salvatore. He paid off every debt and every author. They invited back the artists who had worked for TSR and let them collect their paintings to take home. Millions of dollars of art was returned. He merely said Wizards' policy was that artists always keep the originals. And that was that. David Weiss was rehired. Wizards would go on to pay for him to attend a business school. Atkinson called up Louder, who was another member that I don't think we actually got into this story. But when he was one of the over the books department. He had written a novel, and when he eventually got laid off, he took the rights to the novel with him. But then TSR basically sued him, saying that he had written part of it on company time and that he should have to give that novel's rights back.
Wow.
Yeah. Atkinson made the lawsuit disappear, and Louder rejoined the company. Atkinson reached out to Greenwood, asking if he wanted to work on D&D products again. Greenwood said, "I was eager to go on doing Realms releases until I fell into my grave." Atkinson paid out Arneson, Gary Gygax, and his ex-wife, Mary Gygax. Each got a handsome six-figure check. With that, WotC now truly owned the D&D name. For me, this is a moment of healing. Everyone can exorcise some of their demons. Everyone can take a breath. Everyone can finally stop worrying that tomorrow might be their last day and actually think about the future. It was time to make 3rd edition. But this was an entirely new circumstance. TSR never had even close to the number of resources that WotC did. WotC could afford to let TSR crawl along for years, reporting loss after loss. They could afford to launch a massive network of feedback surveys. They could afford to playtest the hell out of this game. They began to build a team. Ryan Dancy was the business leader. Under him was the design wonder trio of Jonathan Tweet, Skip Williams, and Monte Cook. Monte Cook is a staple of D&D going back to the TSR era. He's gained a massive following online and has always been one of the more vocal members of the former D&D team. That's why I frequently quoted him in previous episodes. He started out working for Iron Crown Enterprises as an editor and a writer for Rollmaster and Champions. He got started with TSR in 1992 as a freelancer, but eventually moved up to being a game designer in 1994. There, he was prolific in his contributions, to the Planescape setting especially. As such, he was a proven author with a rock-solid track record and a bit of name recognition in the D&D community. Skip Williams got his start working at the front desk of TSR, but he quickly worked his way up the ranks until he eventually helped run the Gen Con Game Fair and was working with TSR in the administrative capacity. After 3 years, he was fired, but not without mentoring both Gene Wells and becoming good friends with Penny Williams. Penny Williams served as the game question expert for TSR and helped to run games for women at the company to help familiarize them with the rules. As the game question expert, she gained extensive knowledge of the system and met everyone in the company. She was a truly prolific editor. She helped Frank Mincer with the RPGA and eventually became its coordinator. She worked on a lot of projects at TSR with outside branches, including Marvel Comics at one point. She was eventually laid off by TSR in its most turbulent era. However, her new husband, Skip Williams, was hired by TSR to be the new writer of the Sage Advice column she had just been fired from, a position that he held when the company was purchased by WotC. He decided to move to the West Coast with his wife, though Penny was none too fond of the idea. She hated the idea of leaving Wisconsin, and her husband even joked that you could see the ruts that she dragged her heels all the way to Seattle. Penny also got hired by WotC and became a prolific editor once again. Besides editing, she also helped Wizards devise a massive Excel spreadsheet to help them generate balanced monster stat blocks for 3rd edition. She also reunited with Marvel as she worked on a licensed product with them where they included a hero modeled after her called Lucky Penny. With Skip's long history with TSR, they just needed a brilliant designer with a proven history of creating an entire system from the ground up. Of course, with Moldvay, Holmes, and Gygax all gone, they'd have to work with another. Enter Jonathan Tweet. Jonathan Tweet was a game designer for WotC for years. He was there when WotC shut down its game design department 2 years prior to acquiring TSR. He'd helped them rebuild Talicentia previously, so he had experience taking an existing system and reworking them. He co-designed On the Edge and co-designed Ars Magica. He'd been a gamer since childhood, though he'd abandoned D&D in 1979 with AD&D. In his mind, it was behind the times already by then. He moved on to RuneQuest and then his own homebrew system. He was not someone dedicated or loyal to this game. He'd already left it behind, and he was willing to tear it to shreds. These two teamed up with Monte Cook. Monte Cook had been a prolific designer for TSR, and his talents had already been applied to some of the best D&D products ever made. The three of them absolutely had the skills to make a system, but what kind of system should they make? D&D was a dinosaur by this time. While it had been edgy and dangerous in the 80s, by this time it was your dad's RPG. And while its design was cutting edge in 1976, by 1997, that design was practically archaic. There are two ways one could see them going. One would be honing and refining the rules to run more elegantly. This path would lead to something like what we see in the old school Renaissance, a genre of games made by hacking the older editions and cleaning them up with modern standards. But appealing only to their current fans was how 2nd edition had ended up a financial failure. They often did surveys where they asked people if they wanted a 3rd edition. Players would respond, no. Then they'd ask, well, in a hypothetical 3rd edition, what would you want to see? And players would rattle off a lengthy list of changes they wanted. This meant that WotC knew deep, fundamental changes were not only acceptable to their audience, but perhaps necessary to motivate them to buy a new edition at all. 3rd edition introduces the D20 system, a system by which all major rolls, except for damage, are handled on the 20-sided die. No longer would players need to roll percentiles for certain tasks, D6 for others, and D20s for others. This also standardized the thief skills, barbarian skills, ranger skills, and non-weapon ability system into a single cohesive list of skills. Next, they invented feats. Feats were small modular nuggets of a character class which could be optionally chosen to modify your character and suit your personal tastes. With this enhanced customization, the simplification of roles, and the deep and complex character creation, D&D was now a far more complicated system. That complexity and customizability would appeal to modern gamers who grew up on computer RPGs. The edition had a truly staggering number of talented editors, but I'm only going to go into one of them this time. Julia Martin. Julia had worked for Games Workshop originally, but she was eventually brought into TSR. Though she had many responsibilities, the one that she was most famous for was that she was the foremost expert on the Forgotten Realms. She was responsible for tracking all the information of the realms across multiple different authors and game books. When WotC took over, she made the move to Seattle. There, she continued to work as an editor until Kim Mohan was promoted to managing editor. Julia Martin was promoted as lead editor of 3rd edition. With the size, scale, and complexity of the project like 3rd edition, maintaining the rules language and the institutional knowledge to make design that was all consistent would have been a Herculean effort. She said her main guiding principle was to stay organized and keep everything. During the production, she had so many manuscripts in her office that it often threatened to buckle her shelves. Even after 3rd edition launched, she had every single iteration of the manuscripts on her computers. She contributed to all 3 core rulebooks. Eventually, her efforts would be recognized and she would be promoted to senior editor for WotC. Certainly, we can thank her for helping navigate the gargantuan shift in the game's design. It's been said many times, but the problem with real life is that there aren't endings. Everything keeps going forever. It denies us the opportunity to enjoy a moment, captured in crystal forever. Bad times will come again. Never quite as bad as things got under TSR, but still very bad. D&D will continue to rise and fall. All the hard-fought victories here will be washed away in time. But here, at this moment, Peter Atkinson and his team should be proud. The D20 system is going to revolutionize the gaming space. They're going to launch a dozen systems and revitalize dozens of others and create a new wave of game designers who will invent the next 20 years of gaming. They did the impossible. They made a version of D&D that was culturally relevant and financially successful. A version that drew old players back and got new players excited. In the long eye of history, we can say the 3rd edition had serious problems. But it was a new innovation, and anything new will require some learning. For once, D&D was on the cutting edge of game design again. WotC mended fences, they paid their debts, they healed the deep wounds TSR had left in the gaming world. Those people who experienced the trauma of the final years of TSR finally got to work together on something that changed gaming forever. They finally got to live the dream that had drawn them to Lake Geneva. And sure, it had cost them Gygax and TSR, and it required them to move to Seattle. But here they were. They won. And I'm glad. I'm genuinely glad for them. They deserved a moment like this. So you know what? This story doesn't end here. But I'm going to give these people, and this time, an ending. At least for a little while. I'm going to let them live in this moment. I don't know, after last time, where everything was so bad.
This is a very big uphill moment.
Yeah, they definitely fought their way back up. Alright, well, story time is over. now on to the main event, which is, of course, your character.
Yeah, 3.5 edition's a little special too, because that's the edition I started playing in.
This is my starter edition too. This is where I began the game.
Yeah.
I started in 3.5, not 3.0, so this is technically 3.0 period. But we're using the 3.5 rules because there's no official version of the 3.0 system out. Just like how we use the 2.5 rules of second edition both times, because there's no official version of the 2.0 rules out. So we got to use what we have, and what we have is 3.5. That's fine. Mm-hmm. I had fun revisiting some of this stuff. Like, I mean, a lot of it brought back. I mean, a lot of it started to come back to me. Like, I started to feel like, oh, right, I remember this. I remember this. I remember how this worked. Like,
so a lot of this wasn't that much of a like remembering down memory thing for me, because I think when I had started, our DM was teaching a bunch of us newbies how to play. I think.
Yeah.
And so I don't like this whole skill sheet here. I don't even think we used these not expanded skills, but like these skills here. We just had our stats, we had our weapons, and then we had like, you know, our few notable, of course, our spells, right? But our few notable things. Or at least that's how it was for me. I just had mine on a little like scrap piece of paper.
Let's start with just the simple one. How did it feel to make a character in this version of the game?
Some parts it felt more similar, right, to what we see today with like everything kind of simplifying, I guess, with like the strength and dexterity, like all the stat wise.
Honestly, I can say I thought at this point in history we had more defined class features than we do. Like, in a 5th edition rulebook, you get a little bundle of, like, at level 3, you get this. And it might have a thing at the end that, like, at level 18, it adds this on. Or, like, at level, like, 15, you gain this as well. Like, you know, for the Paladin's aura. Like, at level 18, it expands to 30 feet. That kind of thing. But it's a lot more of a gradual evolution from that 2nd edition, like, here's a bunch of vague nonsense that you can maybe get if your DM is okay with it. And then in this version, it's like, here's very defined nonsense, but a bunch of it, and it's all together, and it's kind of just in a big, long wall of text. There's actually...
I was not a fan of the giant walls of text. There were points where... So that's why I'm so glad there's a huge, like, proficiency skills table at the bottom telling you which ones you can take part in. At the cheaper skill point value.
Yeah, I remember...
rather than the paragraph.
I remember an author by the name of Noonan, David Noonan, who was working on these books at the time. I read one of his interviews, and he said he would take the design to Skip Williams and be like, here's these pages, this is as short as I can make it. And Skip Williams would be like, well, combine these into one column and then delete this spacing and just bunch it all together and send it out like that. And he would return it and he would say, well, this is a layout that only a mother could love, but here it is, it fits. And so, like, there was a lot of, like, internal struggle to get the contents of this book to fit in the page count as well, which contributes definitely to the walls of text.
Yeah, for me, the walls of text, as much as I love Dungeons and Dragons, like, it's, my eyes glaze over. Maybe that's me nowadays, though, with, you know, fancy, you know, D&D tools, just Google.
Oh, no, I mean, when I saw an entire page of Bard abilities, just...
Bard music, all the different,
almost
like...
impossible to like, because, like, it's all part of one major ability, which is like bardic.
One piece of bold text.
Yeah, bardic music.
More.
And then there are like 16 like sub-abilities, or like 6 different sub-abilities that each come on at different levels. And they're in order of when you get them. But it's easy to just like glance over. Like, I missed the first 2 that you got. Like, when we were doing it and putting in the sheet, I was reading out the 3rd one. And then you're like, wait, on the sheet it says you get these 2.
And if you're making a character for the first time, like, you're probably not reading all of it.
Yeah.
Or for the second time, and third time, for that matter.
there's something to be said for, like, everything has clear mechanical definition now. Everything is kind of, like, defined and very laid out, and what it does is very clear. Like, they have put in the design work to make these game abilities, but they have not really learned elegance yet. Like, elegance of design. Which makes sense. I mean, this is the first crack at a D20 system, like a class RPG with skill abilities like this, like, cumbersome, very clunky.
The tables were a lifesaver. The tables are always a lifesaver for me. Something about them just makes the information easier to quickly reference, but also just digest. But yeah, I wouldn't even have known I got those bardic music. That section was so long. I was like, I'll come back to that later.
So, so to be clear, we're playing a bard. Satyr is not in the book.
No, it's not.
You remember your first character being a satyr.
My first character, Vel, he was a short little satyr bard. So I had to.
Yeah.
I couldn't not.
But yeah, so you couldn't not do a satyr. I mean, like, it had to be. And, of course, I, as your DM, can give you permission to do these things. And so we reflavored the elf as satyr.
Yeah, we just took an elf and put a little bit of spice on it.
I mean, look at this art. So cute.
Using all of the elf traits, because Faye! Close enough, you know.
Lavira Quill? That's the actual name of your old character, right?
No. The name of my old character was Errol Fell. Which Errol was which was their secret name. Lyra is a constellation having... it was a constellation's name spelt backward. So it's like, well, I have to maybe have some callback to that. So I kept the Vel part and then kind of tried to extend it from there. I don't know where the quill came from. It just sounded right. As bards like to do.
32 skill points because you're a bard, so you're very skilled. And each skill point lets you put a rank or a half rank, depending on whether it's a class skill or a non-class skill.
I believe I did them right.
And so we can see here you've got Tumbler.
Tumble again. Tumble sounds like such a fun... The ability to fall over. I like that.
Survival. Oh my goodness. For whatever reason, it's fighting me a little bit. Spellcraft. Sleight of hand. Perform wind. Perform dance. Perform string. So like wind instruments, string instruments. Move silently. Listen. Knowledge. Nature. Because knowledges are also like knowledges and performs are both like categories that you can then specialize in. So,
and there are specifically, because of, there are some bardic abilities that require a specific rank in performance, which I found interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, I just don't get my class if I don't take 3 perform? Okay. Kind of strange. Hide, escape artist, and then obviously you've actually gone through and put your ability score modifier on each of them.
Yeah, the total is that bright red number on the left, and then I just went through doing the ability score modifiers because I wanted to know, because I get them, so might as well use them. I can now open doors despite not being a rogue. I'm sorry, not open doors. I think it was like open lock or something. Yeah.
A light crossbow and a long sword? Question mark.
Yeah, it feels so well because my 5th edition bard had a collection of long swords he could not use. So it just felt weird being like, I can have a long sword? Base attack bonus of 0 does hurt, though. Feels bad.
We have our saving throw, fortitude, reflex, and will. Not only does a modifier of 0 to attack feel bad, ACs are higher, so your chance of hitting is really bad with an attack.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so we have saving throws, our first introduction to saving throws, a concept that will persist through 4th edition and into 5th edition, although it will evolve slightly from what it is here. Con, Dex, and Will. So these are basically how spells, these are your armor classes for spells, sort of, replacing the old saving throw matrix, where you had, like, versus wands and staves, versus poison, versus dragon. Yeah. So now you just have generalized saving throws that they can call for with monster abilities and spells.
Feels so much easier to keep track.
A lot simpler design.
Speaking of our beautiful ability score,
yeah,
we rolled
4d6 drop lowest is finally in effect again. So we are powerful.
yes, which does match my original. I rolled really good for my first bard as well. And I love being Dexy, so despite being Charisma, I just threw it all in Dex. Well, because also at level 1, right? We're making a level 1 character here, so it's not like I'm gonna get any ability score bonuses or anything.
Yeah, I was surprised to learn that ability scores in this version, like from your racial modifiers, just neutralize basically. So you get a +2 and a -2, right? Yeah. As opposed to getting like, 5th edition tried some minuses on monster races in expanded material that they later took back. And in the case of Elf, it's -2 to Con, +2 to Dex. -2 Con is rough. Like, man, it's that sucks. for Elves, that's rough.
Yeah, that's why I felt the need to put the original like 14 in there just to give myself a little bit of padding.
Yeah, I would not much care to have a -2 to Con. I don't see myself ever playing an elf.
The 19 Dex level one though, I did enjoy that. I did enjoy that a lot.
Rolling for stats allows for some fun shit sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Charisma 16, Wiz 13, I mean, these are good stats in general, like really good. Even for 46 drop lowest, these are good stats.
Yeah, the charisma I could have shuffled things around for the charisma to maybe make it be higher, but 16 is still good. You know?
I mean, Bard is a charisma class, so it makes sense to focus on it, and 19 in Dex versus 16 in charisma, that's the question, right? Should we have gone higher Dex or higher charisma? In the end, I think since you don't get a spell at level 1, I think probably at level 1 especially, the Dex is more important. It determines your ability to hit with a ranged attack.
Especially with my 7 HP, that D6 plus my con, which has a -2.
Yeah. And you start with AC 17, which is pretty solid.
Yeah, I was so surprised. At first I thought it was 18. I was like, that can't be right. And it wasn't, because you start at 10. But in 5, we start at 11 being the base for AC.
No, 10 is still base.
10 is still base. Why did I think it's 11?
I don't know. I
have no idea. But I was very surprised. I think it's maybe with the difference with the studded leather. So the armor bonus is +3 right now because I have studded leather armor, because we had taken instead of rolling for gold, which I still got to. There's now kits, just like a little quick build. Like, hey, here, take this bard gnome. And I was like, well, I'm not a gnome, but I'll take the stuff.
Yeah. It's like giving you... It's in 5th edition, they break it away from race. They just give you, like, a starter kit of items. But in this version, it's like a full build. It's like your first level feat, your race, your items, your stats, like everything. Just done. Like, ready to go.
So I took the studded leather from that, which gives the +3 armor bonus. And studded leather, I don't know if it does this in 12e. But it allows you for a 5 for your dex bonus. You can have a max.
Yeah, so studded leather in 5e is 12 plus your dex versus, but you don't start with studded leather in 5e. Like with no class gives you studded leather in 5e at the beginning. You have to start with the basic leather, which is like 11 plus dex.
Yeah.
So 2 lower than this.
But it's possible. The one thing I didn't check out was what level the character was in the kit.
Oh, the kit was for level 1. The kit is for level 1.
Was for level 1? Okay.
So, interesting note here. I see you have not filled in your touch armor class and your flat-footed armor class. So, in this version of the game, you have 4 armor classes. And so, touch is your basic armor class minus your dexterity. Or, no, I'm sorry. Touch is minus your... Yeah, touch is minus your dexterity, so it's just 13. So your armor class will be 13. And your flat-footed armor class would be just your armor. No, so your touch would be 14, because it would be your total plus your dex. Touch, 14. Your flat-footed would be just your armor bonus plus 10, so it would be 13. So just your +3 from armor.
Yeah, flat-footed's when you're like, whoa, off balance.
Yeah, so like in surprise attacks in this version of the game, you hit versus flat-footed AC. So yeah, and then there's also another one that's like your combat maneuver defense, which I think actually may be a Pathfinder thing. But there's something as well, which is your ability to resist things like grapples and stuff like that. But yeah,
I did fill out the grapple check.
Yeah,
0.
So there's just a lot of defenses in this game, which I found somewhat.
Yeah, when I played 5, we never used that. We were playing a much kind of simplified version when it came to our combat. When I say simplified, I meant like my bard would just annoy people enough where they would run away from the combat because we were taking so long. Flip to this page, flip to that page. I think we only had one player's handbook between the table at the time. Mm-hmm. And we were newer, so
yeah, I would say that a lot of early campaigns for groups are played in that manner.
Oh yeah, I stood on a table and I posed for one enemy until he got uncomfortable and left. I convinced another enemy to go ask out the love of his life and leave the combat instead.
This is still how you play D&D.
It is. I hugged. We ran into 3 imps and I just hugged one until it became my best friend.
And that's the correct choice in most situations.
Yeah.
So overall, what would you say your main takeaway from this edition is?
A little surprised that the bard is only getting cantrips, and only but not just that. The cantrips can only be used a limited number of times a day. Mm-hmm. That was I don't remember that at all from when I had originally played, but I think personally, like, I like the moving of the skill points into just all general skills, because anyone can really try to open a lock, you know, and all that. But also, there's so much to consider with the skill points. It really kind of made it felt like an RPG, right? It felt like I was playing Etrian Odyssey, like, oh, I gotta level this so I can get some of my abilities for that, you know? And I had actually... And I mean, I was like, I'm not handling the skill points right now. I don't know if it was I was tired, right? But I feel like it would also make it not quick to make a character, which maybe is in part why that little starting build is there. Because the starting build also has like a little table that says this is what skills and ranks to do with that. But for me, I was just like, these 32 points that I have to split up. It's a little too overwhelming right now. I'm gonna take a break and come back to this character.
At that point, we'd already been making the character for like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Like this was definitely right up there with the longest of the character creations we've done. Yeah. I would say that like it was never frustrating in the way that earlier editions were.
Oh no. No going between books.
Flipping through books or flipping back and forth in the book. Everything was laid out in a very sensible way, and it all felt very logical. And so that was never the problem. The problem was it felt overwhelming. I think I mean even I obviously like. Someone who played this more than you and played it by the book more than you.
I never played it by the book, and I see why now. That our DM did not introduce us to that.
Yeah, I mean, when we were going through this, even I began to feel a little bit like, whoa, like, oh, there's this step, and then there's this. It's like pick your race. That's fine, no problem. Roll your stats. That's fine, no problem. Go to your class. Oh boy, there's a lot here suddenly. Okay, let's start just taking copious notes and reading pages of information. Okay, fine, we're done with class. Okay, do skills. Well, that's another hour right there. Like, it's just figuring out all the skills, what they do, how to distribute them, how to assign the points, how skill ranks work, how cross-class skill ranks work differently than regular skill ranks.
I'm pretty sure I did the skill points right. Yeah. I basically tried to not go cross-class at all because I was like, I'm not dealing with this type of map dedication right now.
It really becomes tiresome, like physically draining. And this is one thing that I think 5th edition does better, but I think it could do even better and will be doing better with the release of 5.5. Like subclasses at level 1, I think are a little overwhelming at times. Because when you get through all the stuff of like I pick my class, I put my class abilities down, like all that stuff, blah, 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 blah. And then and then you're like, oh, now pick a subclass. And now you've got to read 6 different subclasses and figure out which one suits the character. That can be quite a lot. And so, in like 5th edition, when you have System Mastery, you've read everything 100 times, maybe it's easier. But unlike 5th edition, this version was famous for just cranking out classes, just hundreds of classes. Every book came with 2 or 3 new classes. Not subclasses, classes, full classes, full 1 to 20 classes. And so you would never have System Mastery. Like there was no such thing as System Mastery because there was always totally new classes. Like a lot of 5th edition is just mixing and matching the core 12 classes. Yeah. But in this version of the game, there's 120 something classes at least. And so knowing what's in all of them is frankly unmanageable. And I think that I just think that this is a game of deep and broad customization to the extent that it becomes a little exhausting.
I stopped doing the skill points and I was like, I'm trying the character now. I need a break.
We took 3 days off.
Yeah.
I mean, part of that was the holidays, but you had to take a break. You had to stop for the night. And so we did not get through I don't think that's something that's ever happened before, where we just didn't get through character creation in a sitting. Even with the ones that were really frustrating.
Yeah, and sometimes it would be like, okay, I figured out the main stuff. I'm gonna go look at spending the rest of my equipment money later.
Yeah, there was sometimes some stuff things. Like that, where it's how do I spend my gold? And that wasn't so bad because it was
and I already picked my armor out and all that other stuff when I did that.
But this was really you got to a point where you're just I cannot mentally deal with doing character creation any longer. we have to take a break. And yeah, that is definitely true in this edition. I remember that being true at the time in this edition. I remember one of my first ever games where I actually went to a game shop to play D&D, right? We sat down and did character creation for 4 hours.
Oof.
And that was the whole night of D&D for us. We just made
Session
characters.
Zero, the importance of a Session Zero.
Yeah, we sat down and made characters for 4 hours. It took that long. And so, yeah, it was just, I think that great strides have been made. Huge advancements in the technology of the game and the game design way of things. But, actually learning how to take this mess and make it digestible to players is going to be the next 20 years of evolution.
And then also, I feel not that I know what other characters do, but it makes it, I feel harder to know what other players do and what their characters can do, so you can have some cool synergy or bonding moments of I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, and because I know you have that other ability.
So if we go to the Bard class here, if we go to character classes and we go to Bard, realistically, if somebody who wants to know what I can do comes to my page and they see this, they are not going to read it. And if they see this,
not at all.
They are not going look at this. And then it keeps going down to here too,
and I sometimes, even between the classes, maybe it's just because I'm trying to glaze over it to find what I'm looking for. When I was looking at the Bard stuff, I often found myself going down into cleric territory. I only really noticed when I saw the big character pictures, because it's just that green text on the screen, and
I would not say that that's a very strong delineator between content, especially when you're looking at this you're just scrolling through wall after, and here's the same green used as subheadings. So I think it would be pretty easy if you're just scrolling through real quick to get.
And then I was wait a second, that's not the Bard.
Yeah. Okay. Wait a minute. Now we've hit something that's definitely not Bard. Oh, here now we've hit a spell table. We've got to go back up. Yeah. All right. Well. Great talking about this with you as always. Thank you so much for joining me. Next time we are going to discuss 3.5. which we've sort of already been going over, but we're also going to discuss the SRD, the OGL, TSR, or WotC, I should be saying now. WotC is finally learning to chill out a little bit, and maybe let other people exist in the hobby without suing them into oblivion like TSR did. And hey, maybe that's actually good for gaming. We'll find out. So I will see you then. Thank you so much for joining me again, Kat.
Of course.
And I will see you all next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.